The year was 2014. I was in the 4th grade. I got on the school bus and took my normal seat next to a kid a couple grades above me. I can't remember the guy's name to save my own life, but I'll never forget what he showed me that fateful day. He was playing something on his phone, and I leaned in to ask what it was. He told me it was a game called Five Nights at Freddy's, and gave me a basic rundown. You're a security guard in a haunted Chuck E. Cheese ripoff where the animatronics try to kill you at night. It was a simple synopsis, but it was interesting. A horror game based on Chuck E. Cheese? I've never seen that before. Combine that with what he told me about the game having tons of Easter eggs, something I was obsessed with as a child and still kinda am today, and I was super intrigued, but I didn't really think about it much at that immediate moment. Then, a few days later, I'm on YouTube when a channel I was subscribed to, but didn't often actually watch at the time, uploaded a new video. That channel was The Game Theorists, and that video was titled, Five Nights at Freddy's Scariest Monster Is You. I saw the name and recognized it as the game the kid on the bus showed me, and remembering how neat it looked, I clicked on the video. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the domino chain that click knocked over. I sit 10 years later, far from the same 9-year-old who clicked on that, in hindsight, completely bullshit theory. I'm not nearly as loud and obnoxious as I used to be. I'm much more friendly and considerate. My taste in games, as well as media as a whole, has expanded astronomically. I've actually started making YouTube videos, as I'd meant to for years, even before I found FNaF, and well, I'm hardly a H-bomber guy or anything. I'm pretty decent at it, at least I like to think. I've become a, albeit amateur, pretty decent artist and writer, and I can even almost kind of make something that counts as a video game. The list goes on and on and on. But if I'd never found Five Nights at Freddy's, that list would probably be a lot shorter. So much of my life, what I know, what I'm interested in, if it wasn't for Five Nights at Freddy's, I'd never have found it or had it. So many of the earliest YouTube videos revolved around Five Nights at Freddy's. My username back then had Fazbear in it, and that username went on to become 2/3 of the basis for my first OC. It was through a FNaF SFM animator I liked, doing a Sand Stronger Than You animation, that I found Undertale, which went on to form the last third of that OC, and also redefine my life and my interests. I got into writing through a fandom crossover fanfic, no I'm not joking, where almost every fandom that wasn't Sonic could be traced back to FNaF in some way, shape, or form. My interest in being a game developer someday and making a game of my own, the thing that kept it alive was a fucking tutorial on how to make a FNaF fan game in scratch. But most of all, some of my closest friends are people I'd have never met without FNaF. When I moved to a new school at the ass end of 7th grade and 2 people sat down at the lunch table I'd picked because it was empty, the thing that saved me from that awkwardness was one of them held a Mangle plushie. All this time later, Ren is still one of my closest friends. Dialing it back a few years, I met a kid in 4th or 5th grade, and we bonded over a shared love of Sonic, FNaF, and Undertale. This led to us talking in Steam DMs of all things, allowing us to keep in contact even after I moved away. We slowly drifted apart in 2018, but when she started uploading YouTube videos in 2020, we were able to reconnect. And, well, now, me and Spooky are closer than we ever were. plus a few friends I'd have never met without her. And of course, how could I ever forget the day my sister's boyfriend blew open the door to our house and yelled for me to come meet his sibling who also liked FNaF and Undertale. I went out to see who he was talking about, and my life was never the same. They were the first person I ever really did a sleepover with. They introduced me to so many of the games that I now hold dear. They helped shape my channel and videos into what they are now. They helped shape me into the person I am now. They were there for me in some of my darkest hours, and I was there for them in some of theirs. Without them, I'd never have met some of the people, most of the people, that I'm lucky enough to call my friends today. We're siblings in all but blood, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Webuild is my absolute ride or die, and while we maybe still would have met if it weren't for FNaF, who knows if we'd have still gotten this close. Five Nights at Freddy's as a series now holds a special place in my heart that it'll probably hold for the rest of my life. So much of everything and everyone that I hold dear, I just wouldn't have without it. And that's, pretty awkward when you get to my feelings on the series as a whole.
Five Nights at Freddy's is a series of very drastically varying quality. Whether we're talking fan-made content or official, this franchise is the absolute definition of hit or miss. Games like 4 and UCN being games I find incredibly enjoyable gameplay-wise, while games like 3 and Sister Location make me want to take a tooth out with an ice skate Castaway style. I gotta be real, I do not know how this series reached the heights it did off one alone. The mechanics aren't really super engaging, half the animatronic renders just look fucking goofy removed from context, and the difficulty goes from the Cuphead journalist could beat it blindfolded on nights 1 and 2, to you would need 18 shots of espresso mixed with Adderall to play this with any kind of efficiency on nights 4 onward, with night 3 being the only time the game feels properly balanced. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but I do not know how you're supposed to keep your power up in FNaF 1. Even when I try as hard as I can to conserve it, I still have to rely on good power outage RNG to get all the way to 6. FNaF 2 isn't much better either. Admittedly, I have a soft spot for this one. I followed the hype for the second game all the way through, and as much as I recognize it's not actually that fun to play, I still can't help but love it. I much prefer its aesthetic to 1's. The withered animatronics are my favorite design set in the series, and I can't place it, but I just adore something about the mask as a mechanic. I don't know if it's the concept itself, the execution of it, some other factor, but something about it I just can't help but adore. The game suffers from a similar issue of 1 where the difficulty just right angles from piss easy to diarrhea hard, but it's the FNaF game I have the most nostalgia with, so even though I know in my brain it's kind of just a panicked scramble against RNG, it'll always be perfect in my heart. Now 3 on the other hand can suck it. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is the first time I ever cognitively processed that I thought a game was bad. Not on release, of course, but a few years after the fact, maybe 2018 or so. The game is built around a mechanic that, as far as I can tell, does not work. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it just does not work. Like, I guess it's working, but it really just doesn't feel like it is. The audio button just kind of feels like it vaguely gestures in the direction of wherever you put it, and whether or not it actually functions properly is literally up to the will of God. I have had nights where Springtrap literally stays in the same spot for the entire night, and others where Springtrap ignores every single lure I place down and gets a new ruin my day any % world record. I try, and I try, and I try to enjoy and play this game, but no matter what I do, and no matter how much the code actually is using and processing my actions, it doesn't feel like my inputs are doing anything meaningful. And when I go to a game, I want my actions to feel meaningful. I go to games for escapism. If I want to feel like my actions are meaningless, I'll just keep living real life. Combine that with how annoying the control panel is, despite being really cool in concept, as well as how you're literally not getting the good ending without a guide, it doesn't really make a terrifically fun experience. Now, I don't want to confuse people here though. I don't hate every FNaF game's gameplay. Just most of them. But we're coming up on one of the exceptions. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is the final chapter, except no it isn't, fuck you. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is one of the only games in the original run that I would undeniably call a good video game, no strings attached. It's everything the original three were trying to be, done to perfection. Its atmosphere is oppressive and threatening. The animatronic designs, while a bit goofy and over the top in isolation, are absolutely horrific in motion. The game grants you the ability to walk after 3 games, but utilizes it in a way that only makes you feel more powerless and weak. You're being attacked from all sides and can only defend one front at a time. In order to even know if you need to defend yourself, you have to sit there and wait to see if they're looming over you. Every time you check that closet, you're clenching your ass shut because you have no idea if Foxy is gonna do his scream when you press that button. And on night 5, you're put up against the big bad boss, Nightmare Fredbear, who has, in my opinion, easily the best design in the game, Halloween DLC included. Nightmare Fredbear is genuinely one of the top 5 best designs in the series. I may even rank him higher than Springtrap, depending on the day you catch me. Fun with Plushtrap is also a really fun concept and addition that I'm sad we never really saw expanded on officially. An easy to understand but hard to master minigame, and if you can pull it off, you get a 2-hour time jump on your first attempt at the next night. 4 may not be my personal favorite entry in the series, but I definitely think it's the absolute strongest, bar none. It's scary, it's nerve-wracking, and though it's difficult, it is crucially fair. Something the series really needed after its first 3 showings, and something the series would struggle to capture again. Though, before we get to that, we've got a brief detour to take. FNaF World was a big departure from the series' roots. It dropped its horror and jump scares in favor of a cutesy aesthetic and made a JRPG. I'll try not to ramble too much on FNaF World because it's the one FNaF game I could see myself going out of my way to make a full video on at some point. I adore FNaF World with all my heart. It is not a good game. Like, objectively speaking. It's balanced terrifically, and once again, you're not getting most of the secrets without a guide. Despite that, though, I just find it to be a silly and fun game. The combat is, like, half turn-based, half real-time? It's hard to describe. I do find it decently fun, and it can get really panicky in the late game, but I personally think the mechanic can also make those panicky fights really frustrating RNG gauntlets at times. The game's got like 6 endings, most of which you can get in like 1 save file. Then, a few months after release, we got Update 2 and the Halloween area, and just a lot of shit. FNaF World is a game that, while I do enjoy a lot, I feel like it was kinda scatterbrained. Like, it felt like it had too many ideas for what it wanted to be, and tried so hard to be all of them that it ended up being none of them. It feels like it wants to be a cutesy JRPG set outside of the main canon, but then keeps trying to wrap itself back into the main canon, except we were directly told multiple times it was non-canon, except that was a total fucking lie! And then there's stuff like Old Man Consequences that seems to just exist for the sake of it and hold no bearing on anything, and don't even get me started on the pansexual rainbow that... Look, I like FNaF World, but that's not going to stop me from recognizing it is a scattered mess of chaotic nonsense. It's like a Lego house made up of tons of random, differently colored pieces. It doesn't really make that much sense, but that doesn't keep it from being a fun time either. Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. Yeah, that's it. That's the transition. Look, honestly, I'm not going to sit here and ramble about sister location, because I don't want to sit here and ramble about sister location, nor do I need to sit here and ramble about sister location. If you need to be told what the problems with sister location are, the YouTuber Uhyeah already made a video that covers literally everything I'd be saying here and more, and he covers them in way more detail than I would. I'd really recommend you guys go check it out. It's only about an hour, which is like nothing in comparison to most YouTube videos nowadays, but if you really don't have the time, Here's the entire thing at 1987 times speed in about 280p in black and white, with the video constantly spinning but never doing a full rotation. What's that? You couldn't make out any of that through all the bullshit I did? Oops, too bad. Guess I gotta go watch the actual video now. Sorry. And then we approach Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. The final game of the FNaF series, except no it isn't, fuck you. When I started this segment, I thought I was going to be praising the game until I got to the night segments where I would tear it a new one, because that was how I remembered my opinion of the game being. But while writing, I decided that opinion didn't feel properly formed. I hadn't initially intended on replaying any of the games for this video. I was just going to say what I felt about them, going solely off the impressions they'd left on me over the years. But as I struggled to write those thoughts for Pizza Sim, I realized that it hadn't actually left enough of an impression for me to feel confident in my stance. So I allowed it to be the exception. Everything I already planned to say about the non-night segments has remained the same. The cutscenes are fun, taking the Mimi dialogue of the hand unit from sister location and putting it in a context where it makes sense. Plus, I don't need to talk about the ending. Everyone already knows about the hardest monologue in fiction. The simulator segments and minigames are absolutely bursting at the seams with charm, and are easily the highlight of the game for me. It honestly makes me really sad we never got an Endless Tycoon mode. It was all really strong stuff. The salvage segments are amazing too. They are perfectly atmospheric and freaky, and really have you shaking the whole time. But the night segments, well, I actually really enjoyed them this time. And I was playing the game in the hardest way you can without relying on liability RNG. All animatronics in the building, Lefty bought early meaning no salvage money, and 2 new characters on night 4 instead of 1, and I took every sponsorship. Yet, despite all of that, I had a great time. I took a couple deaths here and there that didn't feel like my fault, but that's kind of par for the course in FNaF no matter how good the game is. Overall though, I thought it offered a fun challenge that was satisfying to complete. I got more frustrated in the last simulator segment, realizing I wasn't going to be able to make enough money to buy L-Chip and get the last achievement, than I did at any point trying to beat the final night of the game. I do admit I think the sound design pertaining to animatronics entering and exiting the vents could have benefited from a bit more consistency. Sometimes it would use a sound that's very easy to hear, and other times it would use a sound that was nigh indistinguishable from background ambience. And don't get me started on how sometimes the animatronics would talk entering the vents, sometimes they talk when just standing in front of the vents, and sometimes they just don't talk at all. Otherwise though, it was a really decently enjoyable game, and I was surprised at how much fun I had. I had such a turnaround on this game that it shot from 7th place on my list to 4th on my list. And when your competition is 4 World and UCN, 4th place is nothing to sneeze at. Speaking of, Ultimate Custom Night. The non-canon encore for the series, except no it isn't, fuck you. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 might be the one I think is the best, but Ultimate Custom Night is my absolute favorite entry in the series. I have almost as many hours in Ultimate Custom Night as I have hours in every other mainline game combined. It's just heaps of FNaF characters and mechanics compiled into a 50-character clusterfuck that I essentially use as a make-your-own FNaF game. I just pick characters I think would pair together well. I don't often go for high scores or anything, and I've definitely never beaten 50-20 mode, but I don't need to, because I have plenty of fun just fucking around in this game already. I also just love how, because of the absurd nature of the game, it's not afraid to just be stupid. Withered Chica gets stuck in the vent, Bonnie breaks your camera if you look at him because he hates having to be roommates with Foxy. Several characters will only leave you alone if you buy their merchandise. Withered Bonnie makes face puns when he kills you. Toy Freddy is a gamer who you keep from killing you by playing a game within a game. Half the cast will literally just materialize into your room for various purposes. It's absolute fucking nonsense with no rhyme or reason, and I adore it. Literally, my one problem, I wish the cutscenes were skippable. They drag on too long, I've seen them 80 times, they hold no bearing on anything, and, hot take, I never really thought they were that funny to begin with. Seriously though, that's it. That's my one problem. It's just plain dumb fun. So yeah, out of the 8 original run FNaF games, I like 4 and I hate 4. Perfect 50-50 split, but I live in America where 50% is still a failing grade. Plus, that's counting FNaF World, which some people wouldn't even do. So if we take it out, it's 4-3. Definitely a loss. But come on, let's be real. Sure, the gameplay was unique and lots of people came for that, but most came, or stayed, for the story. The wonderful mystery of a killer who used his position in the company to take the lives of 5 kids, who then possessed the animatronics, and now they're all after you because they think you're the killer. All revealed to you subtly through small Easter eggs, hinting at what happened but never saying. It's a simple but effective story hidden in the shadows of the games. For the first 3. F1's story was simple. There are 4 animatronics, except no, there's a 5th, Golden Freddy. These 5 characters are possessed by the souls of children who were killed by a mysterious worker in a mascot costume. The police searched for the bodies and even arrested a suspect, but could never try them because the bodies were never found. The bodies were never found because they were hidden inside the animatronics, which began to cause the animatronics to smell. Patrons complained, and between that and the bad publicity of child murder, the place fell on hard times and is set to close by year's end. You are Mike Schmidt, the night guard who takes up potentially the last night shift job the building will see, and are given pre-recorded messages from the previous night guard to guide you through what to do. Until night 4, when this previous night guard is attacked and killed by the animatronics. Despite this, you complete your week as well as 2 extra nights before being fired for tampering with the characters and not showering. FNaF 2 ramped it up, taking it back to before the first game. FNaF 2 introduced not just a face for the killer in the form of the purple guy, but also 3 entire new locations to the story. The one we play in, the one opened before it, and a place predating even that known as Fredbear's Family Diner. It also revealed the specific costume used to kill the kids, a golden suit, then believed to be Golden Freddy, because that was the only one we knew existed at the time. We also learned of a 6th lost kid, someone killed outside of a restaurant that possessed the puppet, who would actually be the ones to stuff the kids into the suits, not the killer as we'd assumed. Overall, it didn't really add much to the lore as much as it elaborated on what we already knew. Then FNaF 3 came, set 30 years after 2, except 2 is the earliest in the timeline, making it actually only 24 years after the last Fazbear's closed. Someone acquires the rights to Freddy's and builds a very tasteless horror attraction based on the murders, filled with props and paraphernalia from the old locations, including a full animatronic, that's got a bit more to it than it seems. Here we learn what became of the killer. At some point, he returned to the original location to dismantle the robots, unwillingly freeing their souls, and as they chased him, he needed to hide, and picked the very costume he used to kill them, a golden Bonnie suit known as Spring Bonnie. However, this suit was an experimental type known as a springlock suit, where the endoskeleton could push aside and become a costume. Those springlocks are often too sensitive though, and the killer was impaled by the endoskeleton and shredded from the inside out, left to bleed out and die, until his soul became bound to his suit the same way the kids' souls bound to theirs. Decades later, he was unearthed and brought to Fazbear's Fright, where he stalks and plans to kill the Night Guard. You play as an unnamed prick who is probably Mike again, and must survive your week against him until the 6th night, where the place is set ablaze, leaving the legacy of Fazbear's to finally shrivel up and die. Except not, because Springtrap survived the fucking fire. Throughout the game are several minigames that can be accessed to free the lost souls of the children and put them to rest. Accessed through methods such as physically pressing buttons on an arcade machine through a camera, poking a toy on the desk, and punching a code with no evident significance into the fucking wall tiles. The story definitely got a bit absurd in 3, but overall it made for a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy, where you watch the kids take revenge on their killer and then pass on to the afterlife, before reducing the last remnants of the Fazbear brand to ash. These 3 games weren't perfect, but they told what felt like a complete story. And as the 3rd game was played out by genuinely the most beautiful track I've ever heard in a video game, I was ready for that to be the end. But Scott made the fatal mistake of making kind of mediocre jump scares, so instead we had to suffer. I love FNaF 4's gameplay, and it didn't ruin the story, but it was the domino that sent the series plot spiraling down the toilet. FNaF 4 gives you a look at a young boy who attended Fredbear's family diner frequently back when it was open in 1983. He hated it, being terrified of the animatronics, and his older brother used this to torment him frequently. Until his birthday, when, in an attempt by his brother and brother's friends to scare him, they end up getting his head crushed in the mouth of Fredbear. The kid ends up in the hospital, tormented for a week by visions of monstrous twists of the characters, as he does everything in his power to defend himself. At the end of the day, though, it's all in vain, as after night 6, the kid passes away from his injuries, a mysterious voice claiming that they'll put him back together. At least, that was supposed to be the story. FNaF 4 is the biggest victim of retconitis, where Scott goes on to state or imply things at later points in the franchise that recontextualize the game, and good lord, is it never good? Like in Sister Location, when we learned that the FNaF 4 night bedroom is a real location in the Sister Location bunker? Meaning, William was conducting experiments on his own child? But also means that FNaF 4 wasn't a coma nightmare, but was actually real. FNaF 4 also introduces Nightmare, a black shadow version of Nightmare Fredbear that had a ghostly appearance to it. This character was speculated to represent death incarnate and the inevitability of the crying child's fate. A fucking raw as hell concept that's only made stronger by the fact that the cutscene where the crying child dies comes after the night that Nightmare appears. But, in Ultimate Custom Night, Nightmare has the death line, "I am your wickedness made of flesh." And since you're playing as William Afton in Ultimate Custom Night, that means that Nightmare is actually a personification of William's evil. Which, there's so many problems with that I don't even think I can name them all. But the two I want to focus on here are A, if he is the wickedness of William Afton, the character who becomes Springtrap after dying in the Spring Bonnie suit, which is also the same suit he used to commit the sins Nightmare supposedly represents, then pray tell, why the fuck he's represented as Fredbear and not Spring Bonnie? But also, B, even if we're to assume this is a clarification of Nightmare's role and not a retcon, I'm sorry, but if I made a mysterious character and the theory that the fandom latched onto for what it was that it was that universe's version of the Grim Reaper? I think I'd just rewrite the lore to make that canon, because how do you make a character concept better than the Grim Reaper? You don't! So if I'd placed enough accidental evidence to convince all of my fans that it was the Grim Reaper, I think I'd just make it the fucking Grim Reaper! Also, I'm sorry, but I am your wickedness made of flesh? Nightmare, you're not made of flesh! You're not even made of cloth! You're literally Nightmare Fredbear astral projecting onto an endoskeleton! You're not a real being! You're William Afton's tulpa! Anyway, I could do the rule of threes and talk about a third time Scott retconned FNaF 4 into being stupid, but I nearly killed my throat yelling about Nightmare, and if I start yelling about hallucination gas, I'm liable to shred my own vocal cords. I'm just gonna move on. Sister Location's story manages to somehow be worse than Sister Location's gameplay. There was literally nowhere you can put it on the timeline. It makes sense, because it's either too early for technology that advanced to exist, or actually, that's everywhere on the timeline, because unless you want to try to tell me that Sister Location happens after Security Breach, there is nowhere in the timeline where technology that advanced could logically exist. Even if we try to ignore that, though, there's still the question of how William managed to even afford this shit. Sure, Fazbears and Freddy's were successful, but they were also local restaurants in a city that only has 25,000 people living there in the present day, so Lord only knows how few there were in 1983. 25k is not a lot, and it is definitely not build machines a century beyond the scope of modern science a lot. And, of course, we can't talk about Sister Location lore without talking about Remnant. Look, I don't have a problem with Remnant on paper. Sure, it demystifies the ghosts a bit, but whatever, I could live with it. What I can't live with is the fact that what I can't live with is the fact that Remnant can apparently be extracted out of possessed objects and then injected into other objects to forcefully possess those objects. Also, here's another thing. What the fuck even is Remnant? Can anyone tell me, in no uncertain terms, what Remnant is? What does it look like? How do you extract and inject Remnant? Do you do it with a syringe, like it's blood? How do you know where to put the syringe? The fact that I know as much bullshit about the lore of these games as I do, but I cannot say with any certainty whether or not Remnant is a solid, liquid, gas, or plasma, tells me that either Scott Cawthon hasn't actually bothered to tell us, or Scott doesn't even know what it is. And either way, it's not a great look when it comes to something this important to the series. I think the easiest way to sum up the problems with Sister Location in the timeline. I think the easiest way to sum up the problems Sister Location brings to the timeline is this. At the end of FNaF 1, Michael Afton is fired for odor. This odor is our main hint that Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, because at the end of Sister Location, Michael is scooped and his skin rots, which would smell pretty bad. It's also widely believed that William Afton destroying the animatronics in the minigames from 3 is him collecting the remnant to put into the fun times. Since the location from 3's minigames is the same as the location from 1, there was no way even Since the location from 3's minigames is the same as the location from 1, and there's no way even Fazbear Entertainment would open a restaurant with a rotting corpse in a boarded up room, that would mean that Sister Location has to come after FNaF 1 for the fun times to be possessed, because they're possessed by the remnant William collected from the FNaF 1 animatronics. Except, two things. One, how did William get the remnant to the fun times if he dies before he makes it out of the building? And more importantly, two, Sister Location can't happen after FNaF 1 because Michael has to have been scooped by FNaF 1, otherwise he wouldn't be a corpse and thus wouldn't be fired for odor! The fact that this series makes me say sentences like this. Sister Location was also the part of the series where being able to properly understand and theorize about the games began to borderline require you to have knowledge from the books.
I have read this entire book trilogy twice. Now, what things from it can I recite to you? that aren't things burned into my head by countless theories. Foxy lurking around arcade machines. Someone getting aroused by Circus Baby. A horde of balloon boys. Someone shoots a gun at the animatronics. And, I could probably tell you most of the characters from the first book's names. When these are as important to your story as they are, and they're so unmemorable that that's all I can come up with after reading them twice, that's not a good look. That's not a good look at all.
Pizzeria Simulator is actually kind of alright in the story department. It does a nice job tying up most of those extra loose ends left in 4 and sister location, and putting a satisfying ending on the series. What I would be saying if Midnight Motorist didn't exist! This fucking minigame has been the subject of debate for the past 5 years, and no one has any idea what's going on in it. You know how I know no one has any idea what's going on in it? Because I've seen a freshly uploaded video saying I've solved Midnight Motorist on about 7 different occasions. I think some of them were even from the same creators as other ones. How are you gonna say you solved Midnight Motorist, and then a week later, just say it again? This single minigame literally took what little we knew about the story and just fucking flipped it over by suddenly introducing an orange guy, a green guy, a new building called Juniors, leaving fans to speculate about these things for years, and what aspects meant anything and what didn't, and all the while we never received a single fucking hint about the damn thing in any subsequent media until a fucking kart racer like 5 years after the fact. That's another thing that pisses me off. In fact, fuck talking about all the shit the UCN does to the lore. I'm skipping to this part, because this is where my problem with the current state of the lore lies. Newly released FNaF media, like the new books and shit, love to give us all kinds of new hints and reveals about different parts of the canon. Which I'd love, if they ever gave us the parts that mattered. This kind of stuff is literally the perfect opportunity to give us hints about mysteries we still wonder about. Why are you giving us stories where you reveal that the nightmare animatronics are the product of hallucination gas, when you could give us a story that makes it possible to decipher anything about Midnight Motorist? I don't understand why, instead of using these books to hint towards stuff we haven't figured out, it's just aiming to make the story more indecipherable. Why are you telling us there's actually 2 spirits inside Golden Freddy, instead of finally telling us the name of the crying child? Why are you writing stories about time-traveling ball pits and fucking Fazgoo, instead of writing stories about how Michael knew he could save the children from damnation by typing his phone number in the wall? Why, pray tell, are you making entire books about a game no one liked to flesh out the story that no one liked, instead of telling us what's inside the fucking box? Oh. Right. See, as I'm sure you all assumed, the reason I decided to make this video was that on August 8th of this year, Five Nights at Freddy's as a franchise turned 10 years old. The week of this anniversary came with many new releases and announcements. A kart racer that everyone seems to hate, but I thought was pretty fun, a demo for the Joy of Creation remake, announcement of a Dead by Daylight crossover, even a new game. But among all of them was Dawko's second interview with Scott Cawthon. Listen, I didn't watch the full interview. I just don't care enough to sit down and listen to Scott give a bunch of answers that won't actually mean anything in the long run. I've caught clips of it though. There's the one where he says the Springtrap Mpreg is his least favorite story, which is funny. There's the one where he says the reason Security Breach's story came out the way it did was because he just didn't fucking tell them what he wanted it to be, which was depressing. Then there's the one where he reveals what's inside the box. He opens the segment by saying that if you don't want to be disappointed, to stop watching. Which is fair, because it was very disappointing. He goes on this long metaphor about string and shit, but the answer it culminates in is the words, "There is something inside the box, but I never pursued it, and I don't know if I can find it again." Now, I'm not a psychic. I don't know exactly what Scott was saying with these words. But to me, the general idea seems to be, I set it up, I never got around to paying it off, and then I forgot what the payoff was. I have a lengthy rant about this up on my Tumblr that I'll link below if you're interested. But to give the Cliff Notes version, you cannot put Chekhov's gun on the mantle and then just not fire it. That's not how Chekhov's gun works. You can't make things out to be important and then just decide later that they aren't, because what that creates is a red herring, and in something as complicated as FNaF, you can't have red herrings, because if you do, it suddenly becomes literally impossible to know what actually means anything. In this one move that Scott probably didn't even really think about, he has single-handedly made it literally impossible for his fans to figure out the story. Sure, the odds were low before, but they were still non-zero. Deep into the decimal points, but still non-zero. But now that we know Scott can just decide something that was important isn't anymore, yeah, no. It's just zero now. There's an Andy Matronic video where she makes a joke about Ennard being a physical representation of how tangled the FNaF timeline is. And that joke has stuck with me since the day I heard it, because she's right. Not as in, like, that was literally Scott's intention or anything, but in that the timeline really is as tangled as Ennard's wires. Though, I think Ennard's evolved form, or devolved, depending on how you look at it, Molten Freddy is an even better representation. It's an amorphous pile of pieces, just folding over and collapsing in on each other. There were some vague shapes you can make out and a big ol' head that's hard to miss. But it's mostly just a mess of pieces that you can't see the start or end of. This thing is in a state of fragmentation that even if you had a blueprint in front of you, you wouldn't be able to put it together in any way that made sense. So there it lies. A pile of broken pieces that lives on in spite of all logic dictating it should be doing otherwise. Doomed to remain that way until something finally comes along to put it out of its misery.
But with that, I'm done. Yep, that's all of them. That's all the FNaF games. Every single one. Yeah. Totally. Okay, confession time. Up until very recently, I hadn't actually played a mainline FNaF game since UCN. It started as just me not being able to play Help Wanted because I didn't have a VR headset. But over time, it sort of evolved into me just kind of hating current mainline FNaF.
Help Wanted was never the problem, and frankly, if I ever do get a VR headset, I fully intend to play it. It's a unique spin on the first 5 games with some extras thrown in, but it was also the seeds of the series' downfall. The cassette tapes that told the story of and eventually freed Glitchtrap were interesting and had a nice progression to them, and I thought Glitchtrap was cool at the time. Looking back though, William coming back kind of just spat in the face of Pizza Sim and UCN. And the fact he did it by essentially making a Lich's phylactery out of a flash drive is just ridiculous. But it was fine. It was fine. I was excited to see where this story would go in the next game. But as it was teased and we learned more about it, and we waited, the game was slowly losing its luster to me. In a big 80s styles mall? What's with these two random new animatronics replacing Bonnie and Foxy? I was excited to see it was an official free roam game, but it felt so disconnected from everything else. It was such a weird jump, too. Fazbear Entertainment was always a low-income and low-effort shady shit show, and now it can afford this? After a year and a half of waiting, and slowly beginning to wonder if I'd even like the game, it was released. And well, if you're here, you know how that went. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. A buggy mess of bad decisions that culminated in literally going back to the Pizza Sim location to spit on its grave, defacing one of the game's strongest character designs, and then completely undoing the entire point of the game's existence before promptly resetting the status quo in the least satisfying ending I've ever seen in a video game. When I saw that ending for the first time, I was a few things, but the primary one was just upset. Upset that they'd made Henry's sacrifice from Pizza Sim totally worthless. Upset that they tarnished the best moments of the series just for a stupid sequence where you never even have to deal with William face to face. Upset that they'd taken a series I'd held so dear for so long and that had meant so much to me and just completely bastardized it. And then, as if it couldn't get worse, word of Scott Cawthon's political donations got around. He'd been using the money he'd gotten from the games to help fund the campaigns of people who, among other things, wanted to systematically destroy LGBT people and communities. One of my idols, someone I admired, was someone I couldn't even financially support in good conscience anymore. As my 18th birthday approached, I thought it'd be fun to try and beat all the FNaF games by it, since I'd never really beaten most of them. I made myself a list of fake achievements and everything. But as I played them, I realized I wasn't really having fun. All those cracks that had been lurking in the games all this time were finally appearing to me. And by the time I gave up, I just started thinking that maybe I just hated Five Nights at Freddy's. I tried to watch Markiplier's Let's Play of Ruin, but my heart just wasn't in it. And when they announced Help Wanted 2, I didn't even flinch. By that point, I'd been completely disillusioned with the franchise. The new books all sounded boring at best and downright weird at worst. All these random side games, Freddy in Space 2, Fury's Rage, I just couldn't find a shit to give. They kept trying to retroactively reveal the reasons for things that didn't need reasons, and it's like, I'm already down, why are you still kicking me? In spite of all the series had done for me, all the joy it gave me, I couldn't even enjoy the original games that did that anymore. Let alone the new ones. Maybe I'd just been a misguided kid who saw a cool trend and latched on for dear life. Maybe FNaF was never good at all and never should have gotten all its popularity. So for a large chunk of 2023, I kinda just dropped it. Figured it was just a phase I'd finally outgrown. I'd always have the memories, the fan games, new and old, and I'd always have the friends I made. But I'd never love the official series again. But that October, well, things changed. The FNaF movie, after all that time, was finally coming out. if you can believe it after all I've said, I actually did hope to see it. Less so out of excitement and more so, well, closure. This was sort of the last hanging thread, the last remnant of old FNaF, the movie that had been in production hell since the second game. I wanted to see it, but wasn't even sure I'd be able to. That's when I got a message from Ren. My friend I'd met at school all those years ago, and she brought a mango plushie with her. She asked if I'd wanted to go see the FNaF movie with her and her other friend who liked FNaF. I said sure. Me and them never really hung out outside of school, so I figured it'd be cool to go do something with them. But I also figured this would be the last time I'd indulge in FNaF content. It just wasn't for me anymore. But as the day approached, something interesting happened. Something that hadn't happened in a while. I was getting excited for something FNaF related. I was thinking about the series a lot. I was re-listening to old FNaF songs, checking out a couple new ones, and found myself anticipating what we would and wouldn't see in the movie. By the time the day came and we were in the theater, I was fucking giddy. The movie may not have been anything groundbreaking, but it was cleanly made with heart. The plot, the references, the cameos, even the Living Tombstone song in the credits, I felt like a kid again. A kid in a candy shop, being shown everything they ever could have wanted. It took some time, from then to now, for sure. But the FNaF movie was what put me on the route to letting myself love Five Nights at Freddy's again. And to really let myself recognize everything the series did for me and was to me. I may not have liked a chunk of the games, but I liked 4, and World, and UCN. The story is a clusterfuck of nonsense that will never make sense. But it has its moments. The perfect irony of William becoming a soul-possessing a robot, and in the suit he used to kill the kids, no less. Michael's quest to do a favor for his dad, spiraling into him learning of and helping to end all the horrors that came at his father's hands. Henry's final sacrifice and ending monologue as he accepts his role and casts everything into fire so that no one will be hurt by the company again. The little moments of greatness scattered throughout a sea of bullshit. Plus, all the fan games. The fan game scene is still thriving wonderfully with stuff like Juniors and The Return to Bloody Nights, which is a great game with an awful title. Then there's the Fazbear Fanverse initiative, which has had its fair share of controversy attached, yes. But with the new joy of creation, Pop Goes Evergreen, and Five Nights at Candy's 4 all being somewhere out on the horizon, it's looking like it'll come out just fine. Plus, well, we've passed the 10th anniversary. We got 5 laps, which I actually thought was fun, if a bit buggy. It was Into the Pit, which I admit I thought was pretty middling, but hey, everyone else seemed to like it. Plus, a Dead by Daylight crossover in the future. People have wanted that for years. And on top of it all, the next Steelwool game. Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. Seemingly the next mainline title too. Maybe Steelwool's prior non-VR showing wasn't stellar, but who knows? I mean, we haven't even gotten a proper gameplay trailer yet. This is hardly the time to be worried. I'm gonna manage my expectations, but who knows? Maybe it can bring me back around on the current state of the series. No matter what, I'll be keeping an eye on it. So, where does that put me? Well, Five Nights at Freddy's is definitely a series that I've got a complicated relationship with. It's a series that's brought me so much good, but so much hardship at the same time. I have a massive chunk of my entire life to thank for it, And yet it's from a creator who, if his donations are anything to go by, doesn't think I deserve to have that life in the first place. That statement's a bit melodramatic, yes, but it's not really wrong, is it? But, at the end of the day, you can be a FNaF fan without giving money to Scott Cawthon. Well, if you know where to look, at least. Regardless, as much as my relationship with the media in the series is shaky, it's a series that means a lot to me, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I'd never have met my closest friends in the world without these games. I'd never have made my first OC the way I did, or maybe at all. My life would be completely different in a world where Five Nights at Freddy's never existed. So no matter how bad it gets, or how old I get, I'll always be grateful that I got to be born in the timeline where it did.
The future looks bright, if you're looking at it from the right angle at least. So, I guess there's nothing else really to say, but here's to another 10 years of a bear who creeps on women in the bathroom. Can't say that. My name is Cecilia, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Peace out.